Page 27. All through the sunny night she waited for Amarak to come home with food for her and the pups. When at last she saw him on the horizon, she got down on all fours and crawled to her lookout. He carried no food. "Aya," she cried, "the pups must be nursing. That's why there's no meat." Slumping back on her heels, she thought about this. Then she thought again. "You can't be nursing," she said to Kapu, and clunked her hands on her hips. "Silver growls when you suckle, and drives you away." Kapu twisted his ears at the sound of her voice. "Okay," she called to him, "where are you getting the food that makes you so fat?" He ignored her, concentrating on Silver and Nails, who were coming slowly home from the hunt. Mayak went back to her pot and stuffed on the cold raw moss until her stomach felt full, if not satisfied. Then she crawled into her cozy home in the hope that sleep would soothe her hunger. She smoothed the silver hairs on her beautiful wedding parka, then carefully took it off and rolled it up. Placing it in her fur pants in a bag made of whale bladder, she tied it securely so that no moisture would dampen her clothes while she slept. This she had learned in childhood, and it was one of the old Eskimo ways that she liked, perhaps the only one. She had never violated it, even in the warm, gas-heated house in Barrow, for damp clothes could mean death in the Arctic. When her outer garments were put away, she took off the bright red tights her mother-in-law had bought for her at the American store in Barrow. Walking to the pond, she rinsed them and laid them in the sun. The cool air struck her naked body. She shivered and was glad that she had done one thing right. She had worn her winter clothes, not her light summer cuspak, the woman's dress. The wind gusted. Mayak scrambled through the low door and slid into her sleeping skin. The silken softness of the rabbit fur embraced her, and she pulled the hood around her face so that only her nose was exposed. The fur captured her warm breath, held it against her face, and she became her own radiant stove. In this cozy micro-world, she forgot her hunger and recalled what she already knew about wolves so she could put it together with what she observed. "Wolves are shy," Capagon had said, "and they desert their dens if discovered by man. Yet this pack had not. Did Armorak not know she was human? Perhaps not. She had never walked in his presence, the two-legged signal of man to wild animals. On the other hand, he must know. Capagon said that with one sniff a wolf knew whether you were male or female, adult or child, if you were hunting or not hunting, even if you were happy or sad. She concluded that Armorak tolerated her because she was young, had no gun, and was sad, a lost child. She next considered Nails. Who was he? Armorak's dependable friend, that was true. Yet she suspected he was even more than that, a spiritual father of the pups. Nails took orders from Armorak, but stayed close to Silver and the little wolves. He was father when their real father was busy. He was Armorak's serious partner. But Jello? Who was he? Where had he come from? Was he a pup of the previous year, or had he joined the pack just as she, by soliciting Armorak for membership in his tribe? There was much to learn about her family. Mayax did not know how long she slept, for midnight was almost as bright as noon, and it was difficult to judge the passing of time. It did not matter, however. Time in the Arctic was a rhythm of life. The wolf pups were barking their excited yippoo that rang out the hour of the end of the hunt. The pack was coming home. With visions of caribou stew in her head, she got out of her sleeping skin and reached for her clothes. The puppies may not have been eating, but certainly Armorak would have to bring Jello some food. He had been home all night. Stepping into the sunlight, she put on her tights, danced a moment, and then pulled on her furs. Leaning over the pond, she saw the glassy water, the hollows of her cheeks. She was pleased, for she looked almost like the gusset girls in the magazines and movies, thin and gaunt, not moon-faced like an Eskimo. Her hair! She leaned closer to the tundra looking-glass. Her hair was a mess. Pressing it into place with her hands, she wished she had taken Daniel's wedding brush and comb with her. They lay unused in the corner of the table drawer in the house at Barrow. Quickly, she climbed the frost heave, lay down, and looked at the wolves. There was no meat to be seen. The three hunters were stretched out on their sides, their bellies extended with food. Jello was gone. Of course, she said to herself, he had been relieved of his duties and had backtracked the hunters to the kill. She winced, for she had been so certain that today she would eat. So I won't, she said to herself, and that's that. Mayax knew when to stop dreaming and be practical. She slid down the heave, brushed off her parka, and faced the tundra. The plants around the pond had edible seeds, as did all the many grasses. There were thousands of crane fly and mosquito larvae in the water, and the wild flowers were filling, if not very nourishing. But they were all small, and it took time to gather. She looked around for something bigger. Her black eyes were alert as several Lapland longspurs darted ahead. They might still have young in their nests. Staying on the side of the heave so the wolves would not see her two-leggedness, she skipped into the grass. The birds vanished. Their dark pointed wings were erased from the sky as if they had sensed her deadly purpose. Mayax crouched down. Capagon had taught her how to hunt birds by sitting still and being patient. She crossed her feet and blended into the plants, still as a stone. Presently, a glass blade trembled, and Mayax saw a young bird fluttering its wings as it begged to be fed. A brown, lark-like parent winged down and stuffed its open beak. Another youngster begged, and the parent flew to it. Unfortunately, the second little bird was so far from the first that Mayax knew they were out of the nest and impossible to catch. She shifted her attention to the snow buntings. A movement in the sky above the horizon caught her attention, and she recognized the pointed tail and black head of the jager. She knew this bird well, for it hunted the shore and tundra of Nunavik Island. A bold seabird, it resembled its close relative the gull. But it was not a fisher. The jager pried upon lemmings, small birds, and occasionally carrion. Mayax wondered what prey it was hunting. 3 more jagers joined the first, circling close together as if over a target, then dropped out of sight below the horizon. "The wolf kill!" she fairly shouted. "They're sharing the wolf kill!" Jumping to her feet, she lined up the spot where they had disappeared with a patch of brown lichens in the distance and ran with joy along the invisible line. When she had gone a quarter of a mile, she stopped and looked back. The endless tundra rolled around her, and she could not tell which frost heave was which. "Oh no!" she cried. She turned around and laboriously searched out the plants crushed by her feet. Near a pool, she lost all sight of her steps, and then with relief recognized an empty lemming nest, a round ball of grass she had kicked open. She pounced on it, saw a flower she had trampled, and ran up the heave to it. From the top, she looked across the distance to her own precious house. She reminded herself not to be so careless again. "One can get lost out here," she said out loud. Mayax flopped down in the grass to rest. Her hand touched a patch of Arctic peas. They were tiny but numerous. She took off her boot and then her sock and filled its toe with the vegetables. When all were harvested, she swung the sock over her shoulder and, striding joyfully, rounded her pond and plucked the peas in her pot. She rolled around them with her fingers, and they rattled musically. She rolled them again and made up words to fit their rhythm. "Peas that go tink, peas that go tot, peas that will never grow outside my pot." The puppies yapped, and Silver ran out across the tundra. She leaped with grace, her fur gleaming like metal. Then she swept into a dip in the landscape and vanished. Up from the horizon rose the jaggers, announcing that Silver had gone to the kill. Clutching the cooking pot to her breast, Mayax excitedly waited to see her bring back meat for the pups. The jaggers circled, the longspurs tumbled on their wings, and at last Silver came home. Her mouth was empty. "I just don't understand," she said to the pups. "What is keeping you alive?" Putting down her pot, she went to her lookout to try to solve the riddle. Silver came up the long slope, gave the grunt whine that summoned the pups, and Kapu ran to meet her. She pulled back her lips in a smile and nosed him affectionately. Then Kapu stuck his nose in the corner of her mouth. Silver arched her back, her neck rippled, and she choked up a big mound of meat. Kapu sat upon it with a snarl. "So that's it," said Mayax. "The meat's in the belly basket. Now, what do I do?" Kapu let Sister share the meal with him, but not Zing, Zat, and Zit, as Mayax had dubbed the 3 tawny pups, who had little personality as yet. Zing rushed over to the resting Silver and cuddled up next to her. He rammed his nose against her teats and, taking one in his mouth, ravenously nursed. Silver tolerated this for a moment, then growled. He did not let go, and she snapped at him. He pulled away, but when she stretched out, he dove back into her belly fur again. With a loud bark, she rolled onto her stomach and cut off her milk from him. Zing got up, walked over to Armorak, and stuck his nose in the corner of his mouth. Armorak regurgitated food. The secret of the fat pups was out. They were being weaned from mother's milk to well-chewed and partially digested food. They might eat food from the belly basket for weeks before they were brought chunks of meat that Maya could share, so she went out into the grasses again to look for buntings. Soon Silver and Nails trotted off in the direction of the kill. Having fed the puppies, they were now feeding themselves. Mayax cautiously peered around the heave. Jello had not gone with them. Yet he had been to the kill. He would have food in his belly basket. When the jaguars arose into the air, she picked up the pot and climbed once again to the top of her frost heave. Getting to her hands and knees, she gave the grunt whine call. "Look at me, I'm nice," it said. Jello strode toward her. So pushed around was he by Silver, so respectful of Armorock and even Nails, that he was excited by a voice more humble than his own. He even lifted his tail and head higher than Mayak had ever seen him do, and, acting like the boss wolf, loped up her frost heave. Curious Kapu trotted behind. As Mayak scurried to meet Jello, he hesitated, growled softly, and urinated. "Don't be scared," she said, and whimpered. He circled closer. Quickly rising to her knees, grunting the note of friendship, she slipped her hand over his head and clasped the top of his nose firmly in her fingers. "I'm boss," she said, as his tail and head went down in deference to the symbol of leadership. She started to slip her hand into the corner of his mouth, but he jerked away. Then Kapu, as if he understood what Mayax wanted, swept up to Jello and nuzzled his mouth. Jello heaved open his jaws and deposited food on the ground. I'll live, Mayax cried jubilantly, as Jello turned, put his tail between his legs, and raced back to the other pups. Kapu sat down and watched with wrinkled forehead as she scooped the meat into the pot. When she had retrieved every morsel, she gently closed her lips on the bridge of his nose. His tail wagged respectfully, and he gazed softly in her eyes. "Kapu," she whispered, "we Eskimo have joking partners, people to have fun with, and serious partners, people to work and think with. You and I are both. We are joking, serious partners." He wagged his tail excitedly and blinked, and that's the best of all. She reached out to hug him, for his eyes were mellow and his fuzz irresistible. But he was like water and slipped through her hand. On two knees and one hand, holding the pot with the other, Mayax hobbled toward her camp. Kapu bit her heel softly, and she glanced over her shoulder. His head was cocked and his tail swished slowly. "What are you saying now?" she asked. He gave the grunt whine for attention. Of course. She was his big sister, and he wanted to play. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a mitten, and before she could flash it in front of his nose, he had leapt, caught it, and was pulling and shaking her whole arm and torso with incredible strength. Mayax let go lest she spill her meat, and Kapu rolled head over heels into the lichens. Taking a firm grip on the mitten, he flattened his ears in spirited fellowship, dashed down the slope and up to his den. Then he turned to see if she was following. "Bring back my mitten," she called. "I need it." She flashed the wolf smile of apology, shook the mitten, and romped into the midst of his other brothers. Kapu scratched a whole swath of the ground with his hind feet. The three tawny pups sniffed the mark, and Zit sat down before it. Bold Kapu had written his signature, and it was deep and impressive. Mayax wondered if the mitten victory was responsible. It was quite a trophy to win. Placing her pot by her fireplace, she walked out on the tundra and gathered dry grass and lichens in her sack, for there was, of course, no wood to burn. Although caribou droppings were a better fuel, she was too fearful of getting lost to hunt them. Piling the grass and lichens in the center of the stones, she went into her house, took a small cookie tin from her pack, and removed one precious match. Then she lit the tinder. The grass burst into flame, and the lichens smoldered slowly, giving her time to dig the peat that the dead grasses had laid down for thousands and thousands of years. Gradually, the peat glowed, the water boiled, and an hour later, Mayax had a pot of caribou stew. "At last," she said. On it floated great chunks of golden grease, more delicious than the butter from the Gusik store. She put a savory bite in her mouth, sucked the juices, then chewed a long time before she swallowed. She must not eat too fast or too much. Capagon had said that an old lady, rescued from the snow after weeks of starvation, so stuffed herself that she died the next day. Munching another bite, she went out to the grass clump to check on buntings, and a long time later returned to eat 2 more chunks of caribou. The rest, though she longed for it, she stored inside her house. Then she patted her stomach and told it to wait. For the first time in days, she could think of something other than food. Her mind turned to the problem of which direction was north and in which direction lay the town of Point Hope. The dips and heaves of the tundra spread out all around her and still looked the very same in every direction. "Oh ho," she said out loud, "more lichens grow on one side of the forest heaves than on the other." She pondered this, as well as the oblong shape of her pond, which was caused by the flow of ice as it moved with the wind. But did the wind come down from the north or out of the west on the north slope of Alaska? She did not know. Next, she noted that the grasses grew in different spots than the mosses, and the more she studied, the more the face of the tundra emerged, a face that could tell her which was north if she had listened more carefully to Capugan. Her legs began to buckle and her body swayed. She crumpled to her knees, for the food was making her both dizzy and sleepy. She staggered into the fur-carpeted house and lay down.